And captions should be on and available to you if you would prefer them. And okay, let's get the show on the road. Hi there, I'm Jody Rachens. I'm the Director of Disability Services.
Hi, I'm Lauren Tornatori. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Disability Services.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. And we're going to talk today about our office. We're going to kind of orient you to the office, but a big kind of message that we're passing on today, and it's really good timing. It's the end of the springtime. We have a bunch of months, is that we're really going to be talking about flipping the script, where the students are developing their own self-advocacy as the adult students, and they will be passing the baton, from you to them, and sort of how to make sure that they can be their best self-advocates. So if anybody just popped in, this session is being recorded, and you can go ahead and put chats questions in the chat, or chats in the chat. And we will have time at the end, we promise, for questions. If there's sort of a clarification, just come off mute and ask for it, because we won't be monitoring the chat super closely throughout the time we're talking. Okay.
We do just want to make sure to acknowledge, because we are recording this session, we won't be able to answer any questions about specific students and their needs. That would be a private conversation, but we will be able to answer questions in general about our office. We just always want to make sure we're maintaining privacy as much as possible.
Okay, let's do this. All right. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover a little bit about our office. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between high school and college, the process to register with our office, and how parents and guardians can help prepare students to meet with us. And then we'll go over your questions. I like to start this conversation today. Oh, and we need to introduce, this is Evelyn, our specialist. You'll see she just started yesterday. We're very excited. We have a page about all of our staff, and we have a kind of a TBD under her picture. So now you can kind of see her face there. Okay, so I like to start this conversation today with sort of an open letter to parents, and I'm going to read it out loud to you. So, and now as I prepare to pack her up and take her off to college in the fall, I recognize that this role has ended for me. And the word anxious doesn't even begin to describe my feelings. If you are worried that your child with a disability will have a difficult time making a successful transition to college without your involvement, then you're probably right to be worried. Very few children with disabilities can succeed at the college level. On the other hand, students with disabilities survive and thrive on college campuses across the country. If you still think of your son or daughter as your child, and they still are comfortable accepting that role, it's time to take a careful look at where you have come from and what lies before you. As parents, it is time for us to step back and allow, encourage, gently nudge our students with disabilities to assume significant independent responsibility for their own lives, both academically and personally. There's no doubt that I can explain those things more fully than my daughter can explain them or even understands them. It doesn't matter. Much as I hate it, I know that she has to be the one to convey all the crucial information, not me. And while this may be your last chance to convey all the important information onto the college, it's your student with disabilities' first chance to convey that information all by themselves. Don't spoil that opportunity and don't interfere. These quotes are taken out of a letter that Jane Jarrow, who is somebody who is a deep leader in our field and somebody we all look to very closely when we have certain kind of tricky situations that are going on with college students with disabilities. She wrote this as a personal letter when she brought her own daughter to college. Okay, so as I said, we've got Evelyn. Evelyn can actually wave. We're going to get a picture from her very soon, but we didn't want to indate her on day 2 to have a professional headshot ready. But this is our team. So we're made up of 4 professionals and Ida, our administrative assistant. So if you have called or emailed thus far, Ida is probably who you've spoken to, and she's really the backbone of our whole office, and she will help you get everything together as you're working through this. And if you have questions about your child and how they're becoming sort of into the adult role, she will help you kind of transition that, and we'll switch that communication directly over to your student. just a little bit about our office. Who are the students here at the Disability Services Office? We have about 8% of the undergraduate student body represented. It's rising. It's been, we had a little bit of a lull in COVID. We think that students who are learning online, many of the accommodations they might have needed were sort of happening sort of naturally in the online environment. So we had a little bit of a lull when students were returning, but our undergraduate students that are registering with us are rising and rising. We had about 100 more students register with us this past year than had been registered with us prior. So we have a little bit over 1,000 students registered with us, and it increases daily. It is about 86% of the students are undergraduate. And as you can see, the breakdown by the different schools is there are more students in the FA school, and I think that's just because that school provides a large variety. It's just a larger school, and generally it provides a large variety of majors, so we tend to have more students there, but they are in all of the schools all the way across the board. People really, I think, appreciate seeing the various types of disabilities that we have represented in our office. This has changed from a decade ago or longer. ADHD has risen even from a year ago. It's at 30%. And when we run the numbers again this year, it's possible that it'll be higher than 30%. This is students who self-identify, and they self-identify into multiple categories. So it may be students that only identify with ADHD, or it may be students that identify with ADHD and another disability. So that's the highest one. The second one on the heels, which is also rising, is chronic psychological disabilities. And then we also have learning disabilities. Now, 10 years ago, like I said, learning disabilities probably would have been more than half of this pie. But I think students are identifying in lots of different categories and sort of understanding where supports can help them out throughout their college career. So it's really kind of changing. We do have students that are registered on the neurodivergent autism spectrum, and chronic medical conditions, physical disabilities, and sensory, such as hearing and visual disabilities. So that's just like a little snapshot of our students here. I'm going to have Lauren take over from here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that really guide our office and some of the policies that we have with students. This is actually a chart that we go over during our intake meeting, and I'll get to what that means and what that looks like a little bit later, but it can be helpful just to give a background in terms of where our office is coming from with decision making and how we're looking into the accommodations process with students. So when we look at some of these things on the chart, it's really broken down into a couple different areas. And it always starts with the laws that we abide by, which are the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended, as well as Section 504 of the Rehab Act. Both of those laws guarantee equal access rights to individuals with disabilities into the higher education setting. Those laws also allow us to provide accommodations. When we're looking at accommodations, it's important because I think sometimes the easiest way to explain that is to talk about accommodations in terms of what they are not, and really where the line is drawn in terms of limitation. So when we're sitting down with a student and talking about what they might be looking for in terms of accommodations, one of the things that we're always keeping in the back of our mind is that a fundamental alteration of the technical requirements of a course or major? And what we mean by that is looking at what are the essential things that all students within that major need to complete in order to obtain their degree. And so those are really the things that we're looking at when we're having that discussion with that student, is what would be appropriate while still being able to fulfill the technical requirements of their course or major. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that exactly means on the next page. The other thing that really guides our office a lot is advocacy coming from the student and involvement of other people. We really do want to make sure that students are doing what's called self-identifying with our office, meaning they are starting the process of registering with our office through our public accommodation request form. Again, I have another slide that goes into that in more detail, and making sure that our communication is direct with that student. student. And really those two things are important because we want to build a relationship with that student. And it's important because upon graduation, the rights actually do transfer to that student. So it's important for them to make that decision of whether they want to be registered with our office or not. And it is also important for us to have direct communication with those students because we want to make sure we're able to help them directly. A little bit more about access versus modification was just something I started to mention on the previous page. So when we're looking at accommodations for a student and what might be helpful for them, we always want to go back to what access is. The spirit of access is really to be included. It's finding avenues so that a student can opt in to all components of an academic experience. Accommodations are not meant to aid a student in terms of opting out of expectations. And we do have a few other examples. So in terms of access examples, those would be things like ensuring that classes are assigned to buildings with elevator access so that a student with a physical disability would be able to access their classrooms equally to their peers. Another example would be ensuring that captions are provided on videos and making sure other course materials are accessible depending on that student's needs. Another thing that we would want to look at in terms of modifications and what that means, and that really goes back to that whole idea of, opting in versus opting out. Modifications would be things that our office is not really allowed to do because it would change the criteria for that one student compared to everyone else in that course or major. And some examples of modifications include, alterations of an expectations or course or major. So something like waiving a class entirely for a student based on their disability, or maybe shortening assignments. So say an assignment has 50 questions and, we would not be able to ask a professor to cut that expectation in half for a student, or doing something like choosing to write a paper instead of doing a presentation. Again, those expectations are held the same for all students in those classes. And just to kind of wrap up this point, students are held to the same standard as their peers in the college environment, which does again limit that use of modifications. So therefore, we're really focused on providing access to the environment with accommodations. Another thing that we often talk about with people is, when we get into the meetings with our office and interactions with our office, a lot of people have questions about, well, why is that only with the student? Why can't someone else join that meeting? And this is something that, we used to do a long time ago. We used to have parents or other folks join an intake meeting. And then we did evolve that over time to just have it be between the student and us. And there's many different reasons for that. I'll just go over some on this page. First of all, as Jody kind of mentioned earlier, when we were looking at that letter from Jane Jarrow, it really does provide that first opportunity for self-advocacy and also for the student to develop their own voice in being able to talk about their individual strengths and challenges. Previously, when we did have other folks join the meeting, what would happen a lot of times is those other people would do a lot of the talking for the student. And although that seems helpful, it really doesn't help that student be able to identify what's going on for them personally so that we're able to help them. And that kind of leads into, the more people we have involved in the relationship, sometimes the more difficult it is for us to develop an individual relationship with that student. It's harder when we're working through another person to interpret what that student might need. Also really having a chance to discuss which accommodations will be effective for them. Many of us have worked both in the K through 12 world as well as in higher education. And, myself personally, my background is in school psychology, and sometimes we would be in a meeting with a high school student, and sometimes things would just get carried over because they've always been on that paperwork. And we're not always taking a time to pause to say, well, is that really effective for that student? Is that really what you need? need, or was that what all the other adults in the room just kind of put on that paperwork or decided that? So it's really, again, letting us be able to navigate with that student what's helpful and not helpful for them. And finally, it's their name on the degree. The student is the student. They're really the focus here. And we want them to be able to drive their education from the time that they meet with us at the beginning all the way through to when they're coming to us for commencement. So let's get into a little bit about registering with our office. So there are a couple of steps to doing that. The first one would be filling out the public accommodation request form on our website. That is a form that the student fills out so that they can give us a chance for us to understand how they feel their disability affects them in day-to-day life. As a part of that form going into step 2, it's still in step 1, they do upload appropriate documentation that's also outlined on our website. And we will be putting those links in the chat so that you all can take a look at those. We have about 6 different ways that a student can provide documentation to us. In step 2, our office would be looking at that documentation, and then we do reach out to their student via their UMass Lowell student email to schedule what's called an intake meeting with our office. That intake meeting is a one-on-one meeting with our office where we actually have a resource guide that we go over with the students, and they're able to have that to take with them. It's an electronic copy where we go over all the different things that our office offers. We work together as a team to determine accommodations that may be helpful. And we also go over other resources that are important for the student to know about at the university. So that's really step 2 leading into step 3. So step 2 is scheduling that. Step 3 is having that meeting. And then finally, step 4, which is an ongoing step, is at the start of each semester, the student will log into our Accommodate system to submit a request for their accommodation letters to be sent to the faculty of their choice. And we do send out reminders each semester at the beginning of the semester, around midterms, and then a little bit before finals to remind students to send those letters. They only need to do it once a semester, but sometimes students forget when the semester is really busy, or maybe they're changing their classes. So we always want to provide multiple opportunities for them to get that reminder to do those things. So those are the basic steps with registering with our office, and I'll hand it back over to Jody.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So now that you know a little bit about the registration process, here's what you can be doing now with your student to kind of get ready. So these are some of the things you can review together. So we put in the chat, you can also just Google UML disability, which is what most people do. You get familiar with our website, make sure that you kind of understand what documentation you have that will be appropriate for this. We also have certain forms that if you don't have it, you can download it and have a medical provider fill it out. So, really kind of navigate the website. We've done a lot with that as the kind of the working hub for our students and our communication with them. You can also just review documentation that already exists. A lot of times in the K-12 environment, students really haven't had a chance to learn how to voice their own disability and their own strengths and challenges. That's come up, quite a bit, is that they really haven't practiced that. Some students haven't even ever really seen their disability in writing. So really giving a student a chance to understand how this kind of plays out for them. They can practice with you or with somebody comfortable. I know we have about a month left of school. They might feel comfortable practicing with a counselor at school, just talking about their strengths, talking about their challenges, talking about barriers that come up for them when they're trying to learn. And then, as Lauren said, we have this public accommodation request form, and we really want it to come from the students' fingers. We want the students' fingers on the keyboard, but does that mean that a parent can't sit next to them while they're filling it out and, say, I don't really know how to answer this question? Absolutely. A parent can be there for questions and clarification, but students' fingers should really be the ones that are filling out that form. You can also work together just to make sure that your student is already really engaged with checking their UMass Lowell email on a regular basis. All of our correspondence will go singularly to the university email address, as well as pretty much any correspondence they're going to get from any office throughout the summer. So that is really something to get into the habit of, perhaps even adding it kind of to the mail app on their phone. So it's kind of up there and running, sort of whatever's most comfortable. And also starting to help your student make that list of questions and concerns. We have a lot of times where they come in with a sticky note that says, my mom really wanted me to make sure that I ask all of these things. And, that's totally okay. So, any of those kind of preparation things, we're happy to, have those, be taken back home with answers and those kinds of things. We are going to ask kind of these questions. And so sometimes it's helpful to prepare them ahead of time. The biggest question that we ask is sort of, what challenges are you currently facing or have typically faced academically? And I know that we really dig into saying things like taking tests, taking exams. What does that feel like for you when you're in the classroom and trying to learn and trying to pay attention and trying to engage in the moment learning experience? And also when you're at home trying to do your work, reading your textbooks, managing it all. So, those are sort of the pointed areas that we're going to dig into with students when we have our interactive conversation in the intake meeting. We also like students to come prepared thinking about what are their strengths. This isn't, we really believe that receiving accommodations is a strength-based model that, this is going to help students succeed. And so we want to talk about strengths too, because we want them to be able to verbalize their strengths to their faculty and others that they're working with. Sometimes it's helpful just to know what kind of academic environment or accommodations have you had in the past. As Lauren said, some may not be relevant. Sometimes something that a student kind of outgrew in high school actually makes sense again in the college environment, kind of depending on the different ways that things are happening and that things demand. So sometimes we want to talk about, what did they kind of outgrow and why, and, what might that look like moving forward? And kind of similarly, just like, what do they think would be helpful for them when they're here? And then just, is there anything else that the student should want us to know that's related to registering with us? So that's a pretty open-ended question, but, sometimes there's some important information that we don't quite cover in a direct question that a student might want us to know. Okay, I'm going to have Lauren come on back over.
So I'm going to be talking about some other areas to consider in terms of just planning out for the semester and other things that we may want to think about as you make the transition from high school to college, or maybe from a community college to a four-year university. So one thing to think about is reviewing the academic calendar dates. For example, we're a state school, so we do celebrate state and federal holidays, and at least once a semester there's a Monday holiday. That means that we have no classes on a Monday, and your Monday schedule gets put on that Friday of that week. It always throws someone off. There's always someone who goes to the wrong place. It's okay if they go to the wrong place, but sometimes just being able to anticipate those dates as they're coming is helpful. The registrar's office does publish academic calendars several semesters in advance, so it can be something good to look at and get some things in your phone. Also deciding which type of planner might work best and putting those important dates into that planner ahead of time. I still have some students who like to use paper because they like to be able to physically cross things off. Other students are using an app. Other people are using just a running to-do list. Really, what's going to work out for that student. Also considering different apps for time management and organization, for those of us who do prefer more of a paperless model, and what might work there. Familiarizing themselves with Blackboard, SIS. SIS is the software that we use to register for classes, among many other things. Outlook, which is the university email, as well as OneDrive. OneDrive is where students can, utilize Microsoft Office products and also be able to share those documents with others. I think the other thing is looking at whether a reduced course load makes sense. So this is something that we go over during an intake meeting, but we do like to talk about it here in this session as well. Students who are registered with our office Do you have the opportunity to take less than 12 credits in a semester, but still be able to live on campus, make Dean's List, and be in the honors college? If students are thinking about pursuing that, they do need to talk with the Solution Center so that they can see if there are any other possible restrictions on their account that may prevent them from doing that. But in general, we just want students to know, I would rather someone take it slow, even if it's just in the first semester, to get your feet underneath you, to familiarize yourself with the campus, to make sure that you're set, rather than overloading themselves with too many credits and getting burnt out before the semester is even over. So just something to think about. Some other things would be role playing or practicing talking to faculty. Students are going to be sending their letters to their professors, and we do ask that students then have a conversation with their professors, about their accommodations, or maybe about other things that they may want to talk about. So how are they going to approach that conversation with a professor? So maybe practicing that. Also, if they're sick or they missed a deadline or they were unprepared, which happens to everyone, no matter if they have a disability or not, how do I talk to someone about that? The answer is not to just bury your head and pretend like it didn't happen. So we want students to practice that. And also looking at their communication style. Is it over email? Is office hours work better? Or after class, looking at some of those things, and again, practicing that so that you can be a little bit more prepared. And then finally, researching who the student would contact if they need help. And again, there's a variety of resources. That can be anything from instructors directly when it's something specific about their class. It could be the Disability Services Office if there are needs, through their accommodations or related to their disability. It could be the Centers for Learning or class office if they need tutoring or success coaching, where they can also learn time management and organization skills or study skills, or maybe perhaps they want to speak to a professional advisor, or they want to take a test in the testing center. Do they need to speak to somebody in counseling services, or other supports? Like if they're a student athlete, they have specific supports, as well as, honors college students, living learning communities, and Riverhawk scholars. So there's lots of resources out there. So it's a good idea to kind of research those and know what they are before a student comes here. Other areas to consider as well would be things outside of just those supports. Also, some of the fun things. Are there some goals that the student wants to set for the semester? Do they want to maybe join a club or get a job? And I think, how would they go about doing that? And also, how much time do they want to commit to that would be reasonable, while also being able to get their academic work completed? So talking about what a reasonable amount of time is to commit. And then also, how do I pull back if I've maybe overextended myself? I've worked with many students who want to take on being an officer in a bunch of clubs their freshman year, and then they've got way too many things on their plate. And so then we're talking about, hey, how do we talk to people about maybe taking a lesser of a role? And then a big one is if a student has therapy or, any kind of medical appointment or medications, this is a really important conversation to have about how will they schedule appointments and obtain refills? How are they going to be storing their medication? How are they going to be planning on remembering to take their medication? Do they need a reminder in their phone, or, maybe a note by the door? What's going to work for them? And finally, do they know how to independently communicate with their provider in their pharmacy should they need to obtain more refills or schedule an appointment? Those are things that we all forget to prepare for, but they can be really important and a good piece of independence as they're moving forward. So we're getting close to the end here. So I just want to go over kind of what to start now in terms of getting students, towards that registration process. So a student and a parent or guardian together can review documentation requirements on our website, pick the one that works best for the student, and help them obtain a copy. The student, as Jody mentioned earlier, we want them to fill out that public accommodation request form and upload that completed documentation. We want the student to be checking their UMass email for next steps from our office. We want the student to be scheduling their intake meeting when they're contacted by our office to do so. And we strongly, strongly are begging you to please have this intake meeting over the summer so that we can get you started. We do offer meetings both in person and virtually. So we're hoping to reach a wide variety of students in any location they're at so that we can get you started out with your accommodations. And then finally, together, consider some of the points of discussion that for the intake meeting that Jody went over on slide 11. So those are really some good starting points. I know a lot of times, sometimes people will say like, you know, what happens if I'm missing a step in the registration process? You know, or I'm not registered in time for the semester for that very first day. That's okay. We're still going to be seeing students all throughout the year. And again, we'll be in communication with students. If you're missing something, if we need something, we're going to be reaching out to you and letting you know. You know, what if I forget to request my accommodation letter right at the beginning of the semester? Number one, we're going to send email reminders to do it. So we don't expect you to memorize it. And also you can request accommodation letters at any time. So we don't want students, I'm going to wait for the ambulance to pass. We don't want students to feel pressure to have to do it on that first day if they don't remember. What, you know, sometimes students will say, what if I want to try to not use accommodations for some of my classes or maybe all of my classes? You know, again, that's a student's choice. We're not going to make you send it to every professor. We're not going to make you send a letter. You know, what I typically tell students that I work with is I'd rather you send a letter and then, you know, use your accommodations and then maybe back away as you feel appropriate, you know, rather than not having them and then taking a test and realizing that you might have needed them later. And the reason I say that is because we can't implement an accommodation retroactively, meaning the accommodation begins once the professor receives that letter moving forward. You know, so again, that's a personal choice, but I always say, why not send an accommodation letter? It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt for people to know how to help you. So I'll hand it back over to Jody so that we can wrap up.
Okay, I've actually just decided to go off the cuff a little bit and to return to the conversation about medication, because there was a lot that we unpacked this past semester with, particularly with the medication shortage for Adderall and other ADHD medications. So I do think that if I could give a piece of advice, making sure that your student has talked with their medical providers over the summer about, you know, the what ifs. So what's the backup plan? How will we kind of figure this out? Because we did have students that unfortunately were just in some really tough jams, not being able to get their medication and not really knowing how to communicate with anybody about that and suffering academically. So that's a piece of advice. My other sort of off the cuff piece of advice is a lot of times people will wait to sort of change a medication or a dosage until like right before they start at college. Maybe it's not as relevant over the summer. But often that can really cause a lot of complications as well, because there can be side effects, trying to find the right level, learning just sort of how often you have to take it and when might have a difference and can cause some conflicts. So again, talking early with the provider about, you know, if we're thinking about making any tweaks or changes, perhaps we can do it so that it's situated and settled. And it's one less thing that isn't really a brand new experience for a student, brand new coming to college for the first time. Those are my two off the cuffs. Okay. So kind of talking about some sort of fun things as we've kind of woven throughout is that, you know, we really, really don't want disability to be stigmatized. We want disability to be just an identity that is part of students, just like a gender identity and a sexual identity and a racial identity. It's just an identity, just part of you. And so that's really important to us. And so we've done a lot with our office, which you can find on our website. We've had a podcast for about a year now where we invite students and faculty and staff to just have conversations about different topics. And that's been really fun. Students will get a monthly newsletter from our office, which will give a lot of important reminders about our office, but also kind of pulls in events and happenings that are happening all over campus, as well as sort of what's happening in kind of the news and media with disability, so that people can stay in touch with sort of disability beyond our little UMass Lowell bubble, which is a lovely bubble, but it's happening out here. We also, will let students know when we're partnering with other offices for certain types of interesting programming and make sure that they're aware that they can participate in those. We do have if they're social justice minded and wanted to help us fight the good fight, we have a disability advisory committee made up of students, faculty, and staff. And they're welcome to join that and be a voice and help us figure out if there are things that need to be changed or made a different experience or something like that. And if it just hasn't been clear, once the student has the intake meeting, they are more than welcome to sign up for a follow-up meeting with us at any time, just to talk about disability related stuff or revisit their accommodations. Okay, I'm the quotes person. So this final quote, kind of on a tree, says, "There's only two lasting requests we can have. There are only two lasting requests we can hope to give our children. One is roots and the other is wings." I actually think it's bequests. I don't know. I'm having a hard time with that cursive right now. But anyway, we are wrapping up. So thank you. We hope to hear from you soon. And now it's time for us to take some time to answer your questions. There are a couple of slides that give you some reference points of some of our websites that we referred to, as well as just if you need a little bit of help with some general terminology, we've got that there as well. So I am going to stop sharing and open up the chat with you all.
I just added some things in our chat with, I did put the programs and events page in the chat, as well as the description of the different types of meetings students can have with our office, just so that you all have those. But does anyone have any questions for us?
Feel free, we've got one in the chat. Feel free to chat independently to us, to everybody, or just, kind of unmute. So, if a student is successfully registered with your office freshman year, does medical paperwork supporting the disability need to be submitted every year? That's a great question. No, once they have completed the intake meeting and have an accommodation letter, if that's the last time they want to fully engage with our office, they don't have to meet with us again. They don't need to provide ongoing medical documentation. The only thing they need to do is each semester, at the start of each semester, go onto our software, and it takes about 20 seconds, say, yes, please send my letter out to my instructors, and that's it. So they absolutely, and if they stay at UMass Lowell, as long as things are pretty continuous, their accommodations will follow them. So the only time when we would have to probably start over is if there was a 5-year gap, is sort of the legal time when the accommodations and the documentation may not persist. If something changes about their experience and their life medically, especially sometimes with psychological conditions and medical conditions, and they want to provide new information to support sort of new accommodation needs, or it's something that's evolving, we may ask for that. But otherwise they absolutely would be set to go once they've had that intake meeting. We have do we recommend doing the summer launch to help acclimate? Launch is actually through the academic services, which we're under the umbrella for. And it is, anything that is a touch point over the summer that, if you have a student who, would appreciate kind of getting their feet wet and kind of getting acclimated on campus, learning more about where physical spaces are, learning more about sort of what it's going to feel like to be among faculty and make some connections with students earlier. Yeah, it's a great program. Students have been pretty happy with it in the past few years.
Next one's a tough one. Do we have any recommendations for a medication locker? I have had students in the past who come with some kind of lockbox for their medications. They usually just find one like on Amazon or something small that's not, too large and take up a lot of space in their dorm room, but just usually something small that they can keep private. And those can easily be found on Amazon, definitely.
Yeah, some students, they can talk with Residence Life too about if they need to have a specific refrigerator where they can put a padlock on it. That's, often students with diabetes or have other sharps that are
sharps containers too, as well. They can talk to Res Life about obtaining a sharps container if you have any medications that would need that.
Okay, next question. Do you or any part of UMass will offer, refer to private executive function coaching fee-based? So we don't have anything private here, one-on-one. A student is welcome to make some organizational meetings with our office, where we can, get them kind of going, get them kind of, into a schedule and kind of ramped up, or if they're kind of in midterm times and lots are happening, just kind of unwind or parse out like all the different work that needs to get done. But we don't offer very ongoing singular executive functioning. There is a similar model in the Centers for Learning. They can get some success coaching in one-on-one for a couple of appointments. And they also have success coaching workshops that are available to students. There is a program called Horizons Plus that is a fee-based service where students can get hooked up with a upperclassman peer mentor who will meet with them weekly. It's not necessarily executive functioning based, but it is an opportunity for them to work with them on sort of whatever their set of needs are. So if it is kind of managing a calendar and a planner and kind of how to juggle it all, that may be something that the mentor can work on.
We do. That link that I provided earlier to that said the types of meetings that we have, those are resources for students. And if you scroll down, it also has the community resources, which would be some of the other things that Jody mentioned, like Horizons and also AANE, where those would be private, kind of more fee-based services. So I would check out those pages just to see what might be of interest for that student. Is there a pharmacy close by to pick up controlled medications? Well, that would depend on your insurance. There's, we are loaded with CVS's around here, as well as I know that the shuttle on campus also will take students to Target, which I believe also has a pharmacy. But that might be a good, honestly, to just look at Google Maps to see what's available in the area. And certainly a student could connect with health services to see what options they would be able to provide that student.
Mm-hmm. And there's an independent pharmacy just down the street too, mm-hmm. between where we are in University Crossing and South Campus. So that might just kind of figuring out what works best for your family. But yeah, Lauren's right. Health services is going to give you the kind of the best typical options for students. Opportunities for group-based check-ins. So I think that kind of goes along with the executive functioning coaching. So yeah, there are success coaching workshops through the Centers for Learning that are available for students. Because we maintain confidentiality for students, it hasn't been a path we've really taken in a long time. Sometimes we'll have peer advisors where they might offer work for small groups of students, but because it's really confidential, it's hard for us to gather groups of willing students together for that. But it's something that, if students let us know that would be helpful for them, we'd be happy to kind of look into that.
Counseling does have they do offer groups. I think the other thing that comes into play for us is schedule time too. It's hard to get every student's schedules to match so that we can actually find a common time for them all to meet as check-in. But I do know counseling does run some counseling groups that can be helpful where students can meet other peer students who are kind of having the same struggles as them. So we found that to be a successful model. Next question is, do you have any advice for students with neurodivergent disabilities that will be looking for roommates in the fall? So we do not work at Residence Life. I know Marshall might be able to maybe answer a little bit about exactly how they do the roommate matching. I do know that they ask students questions and try to match them. Sometimes what I recommend is, when you're looking at orientation over the summer, it may be a good idea to do the overnight orientation because that student will have more of an opportunity to meet students. Sometimes what happens is, you meet someone and then they decide, oh, we might be a good fit for roommates, so that can sometimes be a good opportunity to just meet more students, before classes begin. What I would also say too is that, residence life is really good at helping students navigate that relationship, to make sure that the roommates are on the same page with each other. So, we've all had great and maybe not so great roommate experiences, and that is a part of the college experience. But I know that residence life works really well with students to make sure that they're having the best experience possible.
I found my roommate in college during the summer orientation. Anybody have any more questions? And feel free, it can be in the chat, doesn't have to be. Feel free to pop some more questions. We'll take this as we were just so thorough and we gave you all the information that you need. Oh, we have a question. The school asked for permission to send IEP to UMass directly. Will it be helpful? Do schools usually send IEPs? So that's a really important, good one. So we do not receive those when that happens. I'm not exactly sure if they live at admissions somewhere, or something like that. If they mean like you're in the process of your student is in the process of applying to register with us, and that the school is going to fax an IEP directly to us or email it directly to us, that would be fine. That is pretty typical. But if a school just sort of nilly-willy, like kind of sends your student's documentation, you don't really know where that happens. So that's a really important question that we would never want you to expect that we've got what we need. So yeah.
And that is why when we switched over to an electronic, an all a paperless system, it helps because when a student fills out that form, they can then upload it directly so that we know, everything's all in one spot. So typically my understanding when a school does that, it usually goes to admissions, and we don't share paperwork between departments. Again, everything is considered confidential. So I would want to make sure that came directly to our office.
And I would expect that admissions actually is supposed to shred it because it is confidential information. And we are sort of the executors of academic confidential information. So yeah. My school emailed me everything, including the IEP to include when I register. So Esther, I'm taking it as you're a student. Welcome. We love when a student's here on this. So yeah, that's wonderful. Cause then you have a copy of it on an email. So when you fill out our form, there's just like an attach here section and you can just boop and there it is. And then we have it. So that's great.
This next question about, is there one place has a list of resource centers around the campus to give to our students so they know where to go for assistance? Again, we do go over a lot of resources in our intake meeting. A student does get an electronic copy of that resource guide that has active links that are the most popular resources. I believe when a student goes through orientation, they receive an orientation packet or, would get more information about what all the resources are. Typically, the way the UMass Lowell website is designed, which is very common for higher education websites, would be, each office has their own page. So there isn't one large directory page that would have all the offices because it does vary so much. So typically what I recommend, and I had to do this when I first started working to even know some of what was available, was to literally go into Google and type uml.edu and then the thing that you want. So uml.edu and then counseling, and it will bring up that page,
tutoring, writing support, those kinds of things.
So yes, we do list some of those on that resource page that I sent on our website. We do share those with students in an intake meeting, but typically, through orientation is where students are receiving that information. So
thanks, Elena. We'll take your heart.
Yeah, we'll take it as a positive. Yeah.
Anything else buzzing for folks? If a student is using an outside-based, fee-based organization, can they coordinate with your office? Not really. I mean, the student has a copy of their own letter of accommodation. So the student is welcome to share that with whomever they think is most helpful. We do ask our students if they would like, they can share them even with their academic advisors and so forth. But typically we don't.
I think some of it's asking about I don't know if part of your question is is, would they, meet with our office or communicate with us regularly? And the answer to that would go back to what I was discussing earlier. No, that student would have those appointments with that outside organization independent of us. And so we do have some students who use those organizations to come onto campus and things, but they would not be utilizing our office space or connecting with us. As Jody's saying, the student could share their accommodation letter with that person if they chose to, but we wouldn't be sending it to any outside organization.
And thanks, Elena. Our site is user-friendly. We worked hard on it, so that's nice to hear.
Constant edit.
Yeah. That and our student resource guide, we're sort of always evolving as we hear from people that there's things that would be more helpful. We're always trying to take feedback and always trying to make it a better experience. So I appreciate that.
I know we're kind of getting close on time and probably a lot of folks are on their lunch break. So just kind of last opportunity for people to ask any burning questions before we let you go.
And you're sort of in the early group, so probably orientation hasn't happened yet. So a lot of questions will get answered throughout the summer during orientation, which is nice. Again, you can always email disability@uml.edu or give us a call. We do not contact a mass rehab caseworker. We really won't coordinate with outside providers unless it's very necessary, such as like the Mass Commission for the Blind or the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. But other than that, we really don't typically work with other caseworkers and so forth. It's something that the student can talk with us about in the intake as to sort of why or what they might need in that conversation, if it's possible, but it's not typical at all for us to have those communications. Yes, so disability@uml.edu, you can call us, have
978-934-4574.
and have your student kind of get started on things. Our intake meetings begin next week on June 1st, and they run all the way up through the fall semester. But one thing scratched off the list, the student can sign up for the meeting virtually or in person. So whatever is most comfortable for them, they get to choose that when they sign up for the meeting. And we love to get that taken care of. It's just one nice thing. And then they have a point person on campus that they can refer to as questions come up. This is the answer to the roommate question. So we would say that you'd want to find a best fit roommate for you. You'd want to talk with Residence Life. You probably want to go to the overnight orientation to get to know some people, but we don't really do a lot of match. It's sort of illegal for us to say, like, we know of this person with this disability and we know of this person with this disability and they should live together. So we would want to, encourage students to kind of go through sort of the typical channels. Can you provide a letter confirming registration with your office? Our Department of Disability Services asked for one.
That would be unusual. Certainly, I think that would be a discussion we would have with that student, asking, kind of what that person is looking for, so that we can, help provide those things. It wouldn't be typical that we would be providing a letter confirming registration with our office. But again, that seems like a really specific question that we'd want to talk to that student specifically about.
And again, a student has access to their own letter and they can choose to share their own letter with anybody they want to. Anybody. The only people we specifically share it with would be their faculty when they ask us to. So they're welcome to. Laura, I think you came off of mute and wanted to see if you wanted a chance. Nope. Okay. Maybe there was just a sound issue. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We hope this was helpful. We hope to see those of you that are students and those of you that have students very soon. We appreciate it. We hope you have a good summer as you begin to move forward with that. We're going to stop recording from here. Thank you.